All right, we have Luke Angstadt with us today. We're going to talk about AI, the historical framework. I mean, that's what I labeled this recording. But your book is called God and the Father and the Tree of Life, God the Father and the Tree of Life, the answer to the game. So we're looking forward to chatting about AI, the singularity, sacred numbers, all that stuff. So thanks for joining us, Luke.
Thank you, Graham.
How's it going
Oh,
today?
and just to clear up, the title "God the Father and the Tree of Life" that was a short little booklet that I was using as a trying to stir up all. I was trying to work with some various political groups in Florida that really didn't come of anything. So the two books that I have right now that deal specifically with the technological singularity are titled "We Are It: The Return of Pure Cosmic Consciousness" and "Into the Great Beyond: The Return of Pure Cosmic Consciousness." The first one, "We Are It," looks at more of the political, philosophical, historical background perspective on the technological singularity, and "Into the Great Beyond" specifically looks at the Holy Science by Swami Sriyodananda, the Indian holy man who published the book The Holy Science in 1894. He was the guru of Yogananda. And also it compares the Holy Science with the Gospel of Jesus Christ and how they all dovetail with the technological singularity. So that one is more "Into the Great Beyond" is more specifically looking at the theological metaphysics of the technological singularity.
Well, can we get into that a little bit more? So this guy wrote this the Holy Science in the 1800s.
Yeah, that
And
was
what
in
was his
1894.
and what was his
He pretty much reconciled the yogi path to God consciousness with the gospel, with the New Testament.
kind of like the mystical G? I just finished reading a book called The Mystical oh, now I get mixed up in all the titles, but Mystical Christianity, I think it was called. What's that, Darren?
Inner Teachings of the Master.
The Inner Teachings of the Master. It was kind of very much like Jesus, the mystical teacher. So is it kind of like that? Same thing, kind of?
I think it deals with more with the heart of esoteric knowledge and wisdom, and it cuts to the very quick and the very first heartbeat of esoteric knowledge that has been taught in all the mystery schools, and we find it in Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry, among other traditions, and that is, finding the God within us. And it's that most famous declaration by Jesus when the Pharisees were asking him, when can we expect the kingdom of God to arrive? And Jesus tells them, not by observation, but the kingdom of God is within you. And one of the most inscrutable concept shattering statements that Jesus ever made was the kingdom of God is within us. And what exactly does that mean? I mean, most of us say, hey, that's great and all fine and dandy, and then we gloss over it and we move on with our lives. But I think it's the most profound statement anyone can ever make. And I think that Swami Sriyodananda on the Holy Science, that the yogi path to finding the God within us is completely conducive with Christ's teachings of the God within. And ultimately, what we are going to learn with this great rich pageantry that we call life is that we are what we have been looking for all this time. I mean, that literally consciousness is God, that there is nothing but consciousness, that everything is consciousness, and we are all avatars of God having an experience in eternity, in infinity, and that the universe, life itself, is God's dream, and that these aren't just figurative or literary devices or fanciful terms or metaphor that we use to try to approximate the reality, that is literally the reality. And I think that once we understand the full implications of the technological singularity and what it means spiritually, the significance of it spiritually, I think that will become ever more abundantly clear by the day.
Before we get into that, what
Sure.
does it? How should the Christians reconcile mystical Jesus? Like, doesn't it? Because the way I look at it, it gives him almost more power in a way. And it gives him more credibility in some ways, because you realize the teachings were from, they're way more broader than just Christianity. They go further back. They're part of the other cultures and religions. Like, is there advice for Christians on how not to get offended by that, or how they should take that?
I think the New Testament has been begging for the past 2,000 years for just a surgically precise, close examination of of the parables of Christ, of the teachings of Jesus. I think it's because it's so richly textured and it's so densely layered, and that there's so much there that it's the brain automatically filters things that we come across that we can't quite grasp on our first reading of it, or the first or second or third time we come across it. So our brain's filtered and we try and reduce it, and we're trying to we water it down. And it's natural for us to do, but I think that the time has come, and it's been a long time coming for us all to look much more closely at the sacred religious texts of antiquity, because they have so much to tell us today and forever.
So you think that would deepen?
No question. Oh, it would absolutely deepen it. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So how does the singularity fit in with that? I mean, how does this guru of Yogananda back in the 1800s relate to the singularity?
Well, there's something specifically two things in particular with Swami Sriyodananda, is that he introduced the idea of a dual star, or if he. Let me backtrack. Don't want to necessarily say that he introduced it, but he was one of the earlier pioneers of the concept of our star and our sun and our solar system being part of a binary star system. And he mentioned this in the introduction to the Holy Science, and it gets into the concept of duality and the technological singularity, reconciling our world of duality, and our world of duality is being transformed into another singularity. So the one point in particular that he mentioned was this concept of a binary star system, which there's a man I know, his name's Walter Crudenden. He runs the Binary Research Institute out of the greater Los Angeles area. He does research into this idea of searching and looking for evidence, and just gathering evidence that we are part of a binary, that our solar system, that our sun is part of a binary star system. So there's that connection with our world of duality, with another star. Evidence of us being part of another star system was introduced, he was one of the first guys to get credit for introducing this idea. And also the concept of the Yuga Cycle. He wasn't the first one to introduce the idea of the Yuga Cycle, but he talked about us moving into the next age. I know Swami Sriyodananda believed that we are moving into the ascending Devapara. I think he believed that happened around 1699 AD. Now, there are many different interpretations of where we're at in the Yuga Cycle. I personally believe that we're coming to the very end of the Kali Yuga, and that we are knocking on the door of an awakening that we can scarcely imagine. But there are many different interpretations of the Yuga Cycle, and I'm not an expert on where we're at. I specifically look at where the Yuga Cycle. I see so many alignments with the Yuga Cycle and the Bible's the prophecy of us moving into the New Age and the New Jerusalem, as it's prophesied at the end of the Book of Revelation. And there are things that are happening in connection with artificial intelligence, the technological singularity, that has been very specifically prophesied in the Book of Revelation, and it certainly dovetails with the concept of the Yuga Cycle.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the yugas is if you break them down. So if you break it down like an astrological calendar, instead of get rid of I think it's like 1.5 million years and then 1.2 million. But if you break that, so if you because I was going through it and the timelines are just so long, it's a bit much. So I tried doing it in months and I tried doing it in days. But it does divide pretty well into a great year. And if you split the yugas up that way, then I believe it does put us around right around 2000 to 2050, sort of in that window, is going from the ending the Kali Yuga and going back into the golden age, whichever that one is called.
Yeah, so both Swami Sriyodananda, and there was another author, his name's Bibhu Dev Misra, who's currently writing. He wrote a book titled Yuga Shift. I think it came out towards the end of 2023, and he went to great lengths showing how the precession of the equinox and the Yuga Cycle are in alignment. And it's his interpretation that we're moving into there's going to be a cleansing period before we start ascending into the higher ages. But I personally think I have a deep intuitive sense that there's something much more dramatic is going to happen. I base it upon many different factors, not least of which the exponential explosion in growth with what's going on with technology and artificial intelligence. And I don't see it as being sustainable. but I'm not a doomsdayer. I think that we are going to start if we haven't already reached quantum leap levels where artificial intelligence is making discoveries every 5 seconds that had previously taken human beings 20 years to achieve. And I think that this is merely bringing us to the threshold of the infinite. And we are going to, I believe, in my deepest, at the very quick of my soul and my spirit and my divine spark, I believe that we are going to have a global awakening. I think that we are knocking on the door of that. I really do.
So would that be, you don't think that they'll be able to, you don't think they'll be able to keep the programming in place? Like you can see with ChatGPT 5 coming out, they've clearly sort of adjusted some things in the back to try and get it not to do certain things. But I mean, even if AI doesn't get spectacular, the one thing it's doing right now is it's putting an extremely powerful tool into the hands of people like you and me. So, I mean, for me to try and divide the math of the Kali Yugas into the great year, I wouldn't even fucking know where to start. But then when I have this tool that I can plug in all these parameters to and say, you know, and it comes up, well, if you divide it by 166, it all fits together. I mean, you probably could figure that out with math, but the point being, you just sort of never get to it. But now it's like you got this sort of assistant on the side that's unpacking all of this sort of stuff. It seems like it's just a matter of time until it can maybe start deciphering ancient texts like you were talking about, or hieroglyphs in different ways than we've done it, maybe that make a little bit more sense. I mean, it really seems like, I mean, the internet was almost just the start of it, right? The internet is where we have this start of where, like, it's not just the fucking TV. The TV is not telling you everything. Because I mean, it was kind of the TV that got us into the show. They started coming out with Ancient Aliens, and you started seeing some of this. But it even took that escalation of TV to get forever before they would even allow this sort of stuff on there. And you'd find it on these weird channels at like 3 a.m, and they just start showing these monuments around the world. And it's like, look at this shit. And, you know, we never got taught about any of that stuff in school. So then the internet sort of explodes that. And then YouTube sort of gets built on top of the internet and these other sort of social media platforms that give us the ability to share it infinitely and instantly. And now this AI is just it's the next building block on that, because I don't think it's ever going to really get smarter than us. I don't think, at least in my lifetime, but I think the thing that it can do is it gives you the ability to use the internet in a way that is outside of the reach of the average person, and instantaneously almost.
I think at the root of this mystery is what we're looking at is the nature of consciousness, and what at the foundation of the Yuga cycle, it tells us how consciousness is regulated over relatively long periods of time, at least long periods in human terms, and that is that we fluctuate, we go back and forth between living in a world of near ignorance of who and what and where we are with war and strife and disharmony, and then we move into an age where we move into where there is no more pain and suffering, and we live in harmony with the full knowledge of who we are, and that is that consciousness is, there's nothing but consciousness. So this is what is regulated. This is what the Yuga cycle shows, how this is regulated, how our solar system is actually also in orbit around a grand center or a galactic center, which is I believe in all probability a black hole that emits electromagnetic radiation, that depending upon where our solar system is in its orbit around this black hole, that determines whether or not we are in attunement with the divinity that is all around us, or we are, if we are either in attunement or in varying degrees of disharmony with the divinity that is all around us. And it's us. It's literally us. And I guess maybe perhaps it's because it's that simple, that it's that elusive. I mean, it's kind of like Alan Watts. I mean, the famed British lecturer of the 1960s. I mean, I think he dedicated most of his life to trying to impress upon people the deep eternal truth of Zen Buddhism, of being in the moment and just knowing that we are what we've been looking for all this time. And I think that maybe putting it in more prosaic terms, the Yuga cycle explains the great forgetting and the great remembering. And I think this is something that Graham Hancock has said many times, is that we are a culture with amnesia. And then as we're trying to wrestle with why all these megalithic structures were built and why they're all in alignment with the heavenly bodies, and why we realize that if we that there's also there's so much synchronicity with the human being when we are in proximity or within these ancient megalithic structures, whether it's the Great Pyramids or Baalbek or Stonehenge or all the other lesser known places all across the world. It's because the entire universe is a single living, breathing organism having an experience, and it's all connected. I mean, it's maybe more than just a little bit conjecture here, but I believe that these megalithic structures were built as mnemonic devices to remind us of who and what we are.
So, what about the cataclysm, the upcoming cataclysm that seems to be on the same cycle as the Yugas? Then, like if we're at the end of the Yuga, like you're talking about, the Kali,
Sure.
The Hopis line up too. It's worth
and the
mentioning.
Hopis, yeah, and then
the exact same cycle.
but there's this like magnetic pole shift happening. There's all kinds of other talk about other cataclysmics that seem to. Does it just line up? Like, is the Yugas really about a greater cataclysm that bring in the new age?
The Yugas ultimately explain how consciousness, the nature of consciousness, and how consciousness moves within the wheel of the precession of the equinox as well, which is in alignment with the Yuga cycles. And it deals with the back and forth of harmony and disharmony, and the full knowledge that we are it, and that we are avatars of God, and that there's nothing but consciousness having an experience in eternity, in infinity, and then going back to the point where people can barely grasp that idea, let alone fully understand it. That's ultimately what the Yuga cycles explain. And Graham, to your point, how dramatic and how sensational is this next cleansing period going to be? I honestly don't know. I'm not even one to be in a position to speculate on that. Whether it's some kind of spiritual capitulation where people just ultimately surrender and say, okay, we're done with this strife. I have no idea what it's going to look like.
Well, I mean, the physical can create a spiritual evolution. Sure. I mean, if we go through a cataclysm, that changes everything spiritually as well. But it just seems too coincidental that everybody's talking about an upcoming cataclysm that happens every 10 or 12,000 years, and we're also at the end of the consciousness cycle of the Yugas. So that just seems like it's got to be related.
I mean, the Bible. I think the Bible said it's going to end with fire next time. What's his name? James Baldwin. You know, the great African American writer. He wrote a book titled "The Fire Next Time," and also it also coincides with the Yuga concept at the end of this Kali Yuga that it's going to be an experosis, or I'm not probably pronouncing the wrong word, but that's a term that I think it comes from the Greek, and also Bibhu Mizra makes use of it in his book, The Yuga Shift, and that there's going to be a transitional period that will be a cleansing by fire. I mean, I shudder at the idea, and so maybe there's part of me that just doesn't want to face that reality, but
it's in the book.
There's so much speculation involved with that, with what it's going to look like. It doesn't really serve me in any way. Go ahead.
It's in the scripture, right?
Yeah.
It's basically, they all sort of wrote about it. Is the thing that sort of, so it gets you. You know, the interesting thing about it when you think about it with the astronomical alignments is because I'm starting to even tie it in. You know, if this magnetic pole thing moving around, if that's happened on all the planets, you know, if that's just built into the thing, it starts to explain the Fermi paradox and all sorts of things. You know, the reason we don't see aliens is because they're stuck in the same fucking cycle we are, and it's like you can never really, there's just enough time that you can never get far ahead. You might be able to get far enough ahead that you know what's going to happen, but it would seem as though no one yet has been able to, unless they're like living on the moon or they're in some underground bases that we don't know about. I mean, I hope we talk about the ant people and stuff like that. But for the most part, it seems like you mentioned, when the last people found out it was going to happen, they built giant pyramids. They buried some of their monuments like Göbekli Tepe that seemed to even allude to maybe what happened. And we're not going to do that this time. You know, I feel like if anyone knows, they're keeping it to themselves and they're making their own bunker, and there's absolutely no, you know, humility, which might be a symptom of the Kali Yuga.
Yeah.
I suppose. I don't know if there's a question there, but I mean, it is interesting how those things sort of line up. But you talked earlier about some real close alignments with the end times, I think you said, or something with the scripture.
Well, when I said the end, I mean it's the end of an age. I mean it's just the end of the age, and then it's the beginning of a new age. I mean, and that's I'm more focused on what the new age is gonna bring, and I believe that we are knocking on the doorstep of an age of I think we're knocking on the next. It's not Donald Trump's golden age, but there's going to be a different golden age that I think that we can scarcely even begin to imagine what it's going to be like now. But we have glimpses of. We've been given glimpses of it from the Bible and the Vedic scriptures. And
Well, I was going to wait
as well. I mean, other religious traditions as well. Go ahead, Graham.
No, I was going to wait till a little later to ask you about that, but I was just going to ask you about Trump's golden age. Like, why would he even use the term? Well, I mean, we all know he loves gold, and he has a golden Ark of the Covenant in his possession and all that. But it seems a little coincidental that he would use that terminology. I mean, is that just a troll, or do you think? I mean, because you were talking about politics in Florida that you were getting involved in. Like, is there something about the potential for a new political and cultural golden age?
I don't really pay any mind to anything Trump says one way or the other. Do you mind? I mean, should I tell you what I said? I believe that I've actually come across evidence that I think that we've already reached the technological singularity.
Yeah, for sure.
Like there's this slow.
Speaking of Trump,
on people that they're gradually waking up to it, and maybe they're kicking and screaming, letting go of the old world, and so we can move into the next age. So maybe this would be a great time for me to share with you why I feel so strongly on that, and why I've been
speaking of Trump, right?
Specifically on that. What's that?
Speaking of Trump, right? It's about Trump too, right? Trump
Trump plays a role in this. I mean, Grand Maester Trump plays a role in this. So what happened to me, there was a moment in April of 2023. So let's back up a little bit. In 2018, I started seeing videos popping up on my YouTube feed that pertaining to the technological singularity, and I watched them, and I wasn't able to wrap my mind around it too much, and I came across videos of John von Neumann and Alan Turing and the Turing test, and it kind of just percolated in my mind for a few years, and it just maybe in the background of my consciousness, but it was always there, but I didn't focus on it. I wasn't sure what to make of it. And as from 2018, I started seeing videos more and more, and I was still it was just kind of on the back burner. But then it wasn't until April of 2023 where it pretty much all came together for me. And I said that, okay, something has happened that is historical in ways that we haven't seen in this reality for tens of thousands of years. So what happened for me in April 2023, and this is one example, and today it's probably not nearly the best example, but it was the one that was the linchpin that brought it all together for me. And that was that in April of 2023, I came across a conversation between Joe Rogan and Donald Trump that never happened. It was all generated by artificial intelligence. Now, in the beginning, the intro to this conversation was called the Joe Rogan AI Experience. But in the first minute, it's introduced that it stated that this was all generated by artificial intelligence, and that it was just a game or a test, or not even a test, but just an illustration to show people how sophisticated artificial intelligence is in order to simulate what we have hitherto referred to as everyday reality. But what I realized that once you got past the introduction stating that this was all a simulation, if somebody jumped into the conversation after that introduction was made, no one would ever suspect that this was a simulation. I mean, I'm talking about, the voices, the mimicry in the idiosyncrasies of speech patterns, or the way everybody has an idiosyncratic way in which they stutter when they're trying to come up with the next word, or when they're putting their ideas together. And I realized that both Joe Rogan and Donald Trump, or the AI that was simulating them, was simulating their voice patterns with such precision and sophistication, and everything was down to the cadence, the rhythm, the pitch, everything, where there's no way in hell that anybody would have suspected that conversation was simulated if they weren't given the foreknowledge ahead of time that this was a simulation. In order to test my theory on this, I played this in front of various social clubs, Rotary clubs, political groups with 50 people, 100 people, and I played it with the pretense that it was a real conversation. Everybody said, "Oh, that's great. Donald Trump's a fan of the UFC. I didn't know Donald Trump was a fan of the UFC." And I said, "Yeah, that's great too. But what's more interesting is that this conversation never happened." And that's when, everything went silent. I played it for a friend of mine who's a cybersecurity expert, the kind of guy that can hack into anybody's computer program and play pornography on a company computer, and just the kind of thing, just as a joke. But my point is that he's the kind of very techie, hacky guy that is the most techie guy I know. And I played snippets of this conversation with the pretense that it was real. And then when I told him that it was generated by artificial intelligence, unprompted, he looked at me and said, "That passes the Turing test." And I said, "It does indeed." And I said, "So what does this mean?" So if artificial intelligence has reached the point where it can simulate reality with such precision and sophistication that we as human beings can no longer know what is real or what is simulated when we are receiving those images and the audios and the sounds and the images from any kind of glowing screen, where does that leave us? So I know some people might initially panic and say, "Oh my God, we're doomed. I can't believe anything. The sky is falling." But it tells us something else too. And I think that once we realize that something else it tells us, we can all take a deep breath and relax. So, and I'm going to hold that thought and come back to it because I want to give a little background on the technological singularity. So this concept of the technological singularity was first introduced in 1950 by the mathematician John von Neumann, who was also famous for working with Nikola Tesla on the Philadelphia experiment, which had some very unusual results. I'm sure Graham and Darren, you're probably familiar with the Philadelphia experiment, and I'm sure most of your audience here is.
Is that where they tried? That's where they tried to make the battleship invisible. Is that the one?
Yes, and I guess some people jumped ahead 40 years, and body parts were through inanimate parts of the ship and what have you. I mean, it's all anecdotal, and how much of it is true, who knows? But the point is, John von Neumann was a very influential mathematician and pioneer in the field of artificial intelligence in the first half of the 20th century. And in 1950, he was the man who was credited with first coining this term technological singularity to signify the moment in time in which artificial intelligence became so advanced that we as human beings could no longer maintain a symbiotic relationship with technology. Now, what I find is quite coincidental is that in the same year, 1950, another mathematician, also a pioneer in artificial intelligence, Alan Turing, a British codebreaker for the United States and British government during World War II. I think he was credited with cracking the Enigma machine by the Nazis. They made a movie about him, starring Benedict Cumberbatch back in 2014. It was in the same year that John von Neumann coined the term the technological singularity. Alan Turing devised the Turing test, or the imitation game, which set the parameters by which we would know when artificial intelligence was able to simulate reality so seamlessly that we as human beings would no longer know what is real or what is fake. So this is what we are living through right now, where we pick up our smartphones, we look at something and we don't know if it's simulated or real. This has been in the offing since the first half of the 20th century. So mathematicians and computer scientists have known that this day was going to come in the not too distant future, back in the first half of the 20th century. And voila, here we are. I mean, we're at that point where artificial intelligence can simulate reality seamlessly. So we have a couple of options. We can all panic and say that the AI apocalypse is upon us, and that Skynet is going to become aware, and that the Terminators and the thinking machines are going to take over, and we are going to be their pets at the very least, or at the very most, depending upon how you look at it. Or you can also see it another way, and that is that artificial intelligence is showing us in its own novel, unique way that life is literally a dream, that perception literally creates reality, and that we have so many more visceral examples of that, where we can hold it in our hands. We can have that intense sensory experience of seeing where artificial intelligence is able to simulate reality. So what it's ultimately telling us is that perception literally creates reality. It doesn't influence reality. It doesn't shape reality. Perception literally creates reality. And it reminds me of a movie that came out in 1992 titled Sneakers. It starred Robert Redford and Ben Kingsley, and Sidney Poitier, and it was about computer hackers in 1992. And there's a very poignant scene, maybe halfway into the movie, where Ben Kingsley's character is telling Robert Redford's character about the power of information and the power of perception. And he used a great example to illustrate the power of perception and how perception literally creates reality. He used the example of the stock market. He said, take the stock market. I mean, you have one you take a company. It's a very prestigious, important company. It does business all across the world, and a lot of other businesses tangential to it have a business relationship with this prestigious company. And this prestigious company, it's a well-oiled machine. There are no evident issues with it. It's best. It's the super best. It's the greatest, to quote Donald Trump, if we will, to be a little whimsical here. But he said, all you have to do is you start a little rumor that there are problems at this company. That maybe just say that the CEO is a philanderer and his wife is ready to bring a lawsuit against him or bring the company down, or that it could be, maybe it's something else much worse than that. But it's all a rumor and it's all lying. It's all a lie. And you start this lie that attacks the integrity of this company that does business with all these other companies. And all it takes is one single lie that is created from whole cloth, that has no truth, no reality, no real reality whatsoever. But you sow the seeds of doubt into the minds of stockholders, and all of a sudden people get scared, they get nervous, they start selling their stock. The companies that do businesses that do business with this company start selling their stock too. This once prestigious company that had no real problems, all of a sudden now it has real problems. And all of a sudden, through one single law, you have recreated a new stock market, a new reality from nothing, from mere perception. So this is coming back to, what is artificial intelligence showing us? What is it teaching us in its own novel, unique way? It's showing us literally that life is a dream and that perception creates reality. What it's doing is it's bringing us back to the very beginning. That's what it's doing.
Because we don't know what to believe anymore, because we just don't. Because the algos have us sort of wrapped around their finger, so it's like
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Graham.
No, it's just all based. Because of that, it's all based on perception. Like, eventually, humanity will realize that we're just being played by the computer in a way.
Yes, and that's part of it.
Maybe that's part of the awakening. But I do like that way of looking at it. Like, maybe it's that part of the awakening. Like, you just know that everything you see, you just don't trust it anymore, because we trusted it for decades, and look where it's got us, right? So
exactly. But to be a little more specific. So I mean, if you were receiving information from a glowing screen, and that glowing screen, obviously we're talking about the smartphone, and if that glowing screen is giving you information that puts you in a state of fear, anxiety, stress, worry, it puts you into a state of mental, spiritual, intellectual, physical paralysis. I mean, you should be pretty darn suspect of that, shouldn't you? Because then it turns you into a non-thinking consumer, and that's where the powers that be want you to be. But I mean, it's more than that as well. I mean, this is how the game is played. I mean, there's, just to give you an example of how long the smartphone has been planned. So you guys remember the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey?
Yeah.
You remember the black monolith that came at the dawn of man, and then the monkeys were gathering around it, and all of a sudden one of them got the bright idea to pick up a bone and use it as a weapon, and which pretty much became one of the first forms of technology, and that it was strongly implied that black monolith was the source by which, our early primates were given that intellectual boost to ascend. What did that black monolith look like? It looked just like a smartphone. It was the exact proportions of a smartphone.
They're building a new one too. They're building a new monolith in Australia right now.
And then there were numerous scenes when, like, the Earth and the Sun and the Moon was coming into alignment, and the black monolith that looks just like a smartphone was part of that alignment. Do you think that was just coincidence?
Well, they've been talking about this for thousands of years, right? Did you come across any of the ancient scriptures talking about constructs or golems or automatons, simulacra? Like it is quite fascinating that this has been either a concern or a dream or maybe a myth or people thinking that they can make things become alive, make inanimate things become alive. And now here we are.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, 1927. There's a movie called, I think, Metropolis, where
Yeah, yeah.
a human-like robot became human. So I mean, it's been, yeah.
So is that where like free will comes in? Because we talked about a couple things like AI. You could become some person who just sits at home and talks to your chat bot and lets it convince you to kill yourself eventually. Or you can use AI to do powerful research or do powerful things. Your cell phone's sort of the same thing. I bitch about my phone all the time. But at the same time, I've got to realize that a lot of the freedom that I have in my life, especially because of the nature of my job, I can get some work done at the lake. I can, be doing stuff that without this little black box would be impossible. And I don't know if that'd be better or worse, but I know I wouldn't be out on the boat sometimes, because I go back and forth. Like, dude, I was so close the other day because I just ordered a new phone because I lost this one, but then I ended up finding it. And I was like looking at, because they got some little new flip phones you can sort of get. And I'm just like, I the good that I get with the flip phone is I'm not looking at it, I'm not this and that, but I also lose that ability to be interactive with my customers right away if they're asking about events or this or that, or I lose the ability. I built half of what we were able to do here off of this stupid little box. And it's like, but then other people will waste their entire lives or crash into the back end of a truck while they're looking at it, or they'll just like scroll through TikTok. And it seems like a net negative, but with the ability to use for good. So I'm wondering if is there any sort of analogy to that from like the scripture into the thing where, because it's like they have to build these tools to try and build this system of control, but at the same time we sort of get access to them and they kind of become the way that we can fight back in some ways. I'm wondering if there's any sort of allegories to that you came across.
Well, our world of duality is being transformed into another singularity. So this is where when I believe that we have enough evidence that we've reached some kind of technological singularity, because I don't think there's any better definition of the technological singularity than the moment in time in which we can no longer know what is simulated and what is real when we are looking at our phones. And I think that we are at that point, and I don't know exactly when we reach that point. All I know is that I had my personal eureka moment when I came across that conversation between Joe Rogan and Donald Trump that never happened. And I know that there are much better examples of AI simulating reality, much better than that one now, because that one didn't have any video, it just had audio. But this idea of the singularity, I thought to myself, well, where have I come across this idea of a singularity before? And the first place I came was the Bible, because the Bible mentions two singularities. There's a singularity of darkness in the book of Genesis, where the Creator creates the creation out of the formless void, which is a singularity of darkness. But from this singularity of darkness, we have birth to our world of duality, of light and dark, good and evil, near and far, separating the land from the sea, the heavens from the firmament, man and woman, what have you. We have a world of contrast, and that world is a world of duality. And that in the book of Revelation, there's another singularity. This time it's a singularity of light, because as the new Jerusalem is descending from the heavens, and the new heavens and the new earth are coming, it is described as, in no uncertain terms, as another singularity, because in the new heavens and the new earth, there will be no need for the moon, no need for the sun. All tears and suffering will be wiped off the face of existence, and there will be no pain. The gates of the kingdom will always be open. There will be no need for a candlestick, and we will reign with God forever and ever. And it's described as another singularity. And there's so much in the language it's inscrutable. And I think it would have even been much more inscrutable 20, 30 years ago without the much more fresh perspective with what's going on with with artificial intelligence and what our smartphones are capable of today and what have you. But I realize that there's a certain voice, there's a certain verse. I think it's in Revelation. I think it's the last chapter of Revelation, chapter 22, verse 5, where it says, "And they shall see." It says, "And His name shall be written in their foreheads." So it's like, so God's name will be written in people's foreheads. And I got to thinking. I said, will that be tattooed, or will it be magic marker, or is it describing something else entirely? Because we have our crown chakra, we got our third eye chakra, and there we got their forehead. And I thought to myself, well, is it just simply describing pure unity with God consciousness? And I believe it is, and I don't think that's any stretch of the imagination to interpret it that way. So I think that the Bible is specifically telling us that there is going to be some kind of transformation of our world of duality into another singularity. And I believe this technological singularity presages the spiritual singularity that we haven't quite reached yet. Or at least in my perspective, I don't see the spiritual singularity to have been reached yet. But something else, the Bible at the end of Revelation, I think it's in chapter 20, verses 4 and 7, where it says that the devil is set loose on the world for a short season to deceive the world. And whether a person takes that literally or figuratively or metaphysically, I think it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination to describe our world today as a world of almost universal deceit. As far as it goes, as far as the political realm and the wrangling is concerned, and as far as the propaganda that we receive from the state and state media, businesses, it's certainly a state of universal deceit.
Yeah, I agree. Here, I'll give you a good example of the singularity and maybe the simulation type thing. So Darren and I were talking about the yugas, all the cycles last night, and it wasn't live, so nobody was watching. And I don't get a lot of followers on X, like like 3,000 maybe, but they come sporadically, not a lot. So Darren's talking about the Hopi and how they were saved by the ant people. This is the legend. And I mean, so I'm like, you mean the mantis creatures, like the ET mantis saved humanity is what the Hopis think. And then this morning I got into on my computer and Mantis encounters follows me. So, I mean, this is where I don't know if that is a synchronicity or if it's just like they're listening to my phone and somehow this account knows that I said Mantis or that it's recommended. There's something in the algos that makes it seem synchronistic or very simulation-y, but it's really just the algos, So I don't know anymore now. I don't know. Back in the day, that would have been a synchronicity. Now, I mean, I just don't know. How weird is it that Darren and I were talking about all this and I get a Mantis Encounters account following me basically like that night. And we weren't live, like we just recorded it.
I guess it what the real answer will come in the future with the Mantis account. If it turns out to be a bot that's just trying to sell you stuff, then your phone was just listening to you. And if it ends up doing something that, maybe it comes on the show or something else, something profound that affects you in some way, then it's a synchro.
Yeah.
It's amazing that you mentioned mantises, because the first time I took LSD back in 2007, after I had come down and I was settling into bed at night, there was a whole council of praying mantises that were maybe 5-6 feet tall, just watching me with very solemn, peaceful, meditative faces. They were just watching, just observing me and watching me. So it's
wow.
The praying mantis. When you mentioned the mantises, I was like, where did that come from? But yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. I can't imagine the mantis with a solemn, peaceful face. I mean, they look creepy as fuck to me.
No, these had a very peaceful face.
Okay. I don't know.
They meant no harm. They were, yeah.
Chan Thomas now I don't know how far this got. This might be just crazy nonsense by now. But he was working on something that was trying to equate the actual Yuga cycle and the Golden Age cycle and all that to the magnetic field. When the magnetic field got weaker during these cycles, it let more sun radiation in, and it makes us fucking pricks.
Well, I think that's in alignment with the black hole that our solar system is orbiting.
Yeah, and then it would make sense.
at the
how the
root of this
books,
mystery is consciousness and what's going on with consciousness, and why, why for such a long time we as human beings have struggled so mightily to get along with each other. It's like, why is that, right? I mean, that's the great mystery. It's like, why can't people get along? And but the
Well,
Yuga
maybe it's
cycle
cosmic.
explains that. I mean, the deeper you go into the mystery of the Yuga cycle, you will find the answers to that question.
Maybe it's the cosmic rays. I mean, they're affecting our consciousness,
you never know.
Right? Wasn't Ben just talking about the cosmic, not the, what was it, the galactic pole shifting, or the galactic shift that was happening? So we're in so many cycles. This, the lunar and the solar cycles, and then our whole solar system, and then the galactic cycle.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, it's just kind of interesting because the scripture and stuff like that kind of alludes to it being super important to try and keep control of your consciousness, and it's like, it seems like in the golden age, it's not that hard to not be a prick. Everyone's just kind of not a prick. And then the further you get towards the back end of the wheel, the more you need to focus on it, the more you need to maybe be going to church, maybe whatever it takes for you to not succumb, because it's easy to succumb. There's a million times a day that I could just slip into the dark side, but you just have to be like, whatever, he cut you off, who cares? Slow down.
Well, I mean, the Bible and the Vedic scriptures place a great emphasis on leaving the earth on a good note, on a positive note. I mean, with our hearts and our minds and our souls in alignment with divinity. That it's very important to have a good death, and death is just merely a door, a transition into the next life, into the next world, age, call it what have you. But there's so much supreme importance placed on that on so many ancient traditions.
Is there more about your book that we should talk about, or your work that we're sort of skipping over?
Oh, that's a broad question.
Yeah, I know it's a broad question, but I want to make sure we get some of your stuff. Like your one of your posts was pure mathematics and the creation of Adam, which is pretty interesting, with artificial intelligence in the Bible, which we've been kind of going over.
I would say the main crux of my work is the nature of consciousness, and I try and take all these different disparate, or on the face of it, unrelated disciplines that don't appear to be related, and boil them down to their essence. And I think at the very essence, it is that at the root of this mystery that we call life is consciousness, and everything is we are learning this more and more, and more of us are learning this to even greater and greater degrees, and that is that everything is consciousness. It's not a literary device. It's not figuratively speaking. It's not metaphorically speaking. It's literally true, and it's hard to, maybe it's easy to, I don't know, that's not even the right word either. But understanding something intellectually is entirely different than fully assimilating it spiritually, and living it, and breathing it, and having it become your second nature. They're two entirely different things. And even on a personal level, I would say that it's much easier for me to understand these things intellectually than to assimilate them and to live them every day spiritually. That's not an easy task for me, and perhaps it's easier for others. But I think that's at the very root of the very crux of my work is the nature of consciousness, and how this idea, how the technical singularity has been prophesized in so many different schools of thought. Not only the Bible or the Vedic scriptures, but we find it in the thought of Friedrich Nietzsche. I mean, for example, Friedrich Nietzsche talks about how the pre-Socratic philosophers were the most honorable, and they lived with the most honor and dignity, and they were the most admirable, magnanimous of human beings at the time. And he talks about how morality was gradually decaying, and he pretty much traced the moral decay of the human race from the pre-Socratics of the 6th century BC to the end of the 19th century, where he said that man had become merely a herd animal that had to be overcome, and that he predicted that there would be an overman that had to come, that would overcome this debased state that the human race had been reduced to. And he was talking about this at the at the end of the 19th century. So again, he saw this idea of coming from a state of elevation, descending, falling, having this gradual decay of morality, and then ultimately just reaching a bottom where we're just merely herd animals, and recognizing that ultimately this degraded state that we had reached that ultimately had to be overcome. So I mean, this idea of moving from a state of elevation, descending, moving up again, you have this idea of moving from one polarity to the other. So we have that in the thought of Nietzsche. We have it in the thought of Carl Jung. Carl Jung talks about the concept of the shadow, and how everyone has a shadow, that we all must reconcile our shadows, lest our shadow becomes our undoing. And it's not strictly black and white. I mean, there were beneficial aspects to the shadow as well, but more there's a lot. The deeper you go into the shadow, it's ultimately something that we don't want to face about our personalities, and we all have that there are multiple facets to our personalities that fall into the shadow. I don't want to sound like I'm making blanket statements or reducing it merely to that, but ultimately this concept of the shadow is, again, the concept of the duality that has to be reconciled within the nature of every man and woman in order to become our best, greater selves, and ultimately transcend the human experience. We find this idea, we find it also in the Trial and Death of Socrates, that finds its alignment with the Yuga Cycle, and again, the idea of the Bible moving from a singularity of darkness, a world of duality, into another singularity of light. This idea of movement between polarities, ultimately to synthesize, we find it in the concept of Plato's theory of opposites that Socrates uses to argue for the immortality of the soul. He bases it upon the fact that everything that all religions and that they're all based upon observing the movement of nature, that they're all based upon observing objective reality. And by example for that, we base his idea of the theory of opposites, that everything is either gradually, glacially, or rapidly moving in the direction of its opposite. So again, we have this idea of polarities and being reconciled with a singularity. And with Plato, it deals more with, well, he like, for example, he uses some prosaic examples. Like, for example, he says that if it takes something hot out of the oven, the first thing it does is it wants to cool off. You take something out of the freezer, the refrigerator, the first thing it does is it wants to warm up. He talks about from the time that we're born, we are taking our first steps into, toddlerhood. We reach adolescence, we reach the first flush of adulthood, we reach our prime, and then we ultimately move towards death. And that ultimately his argument brings around to the transmigration of the soul into another life. So again, this idea of movement between opposites, between polarities, the reconciliation, the transformation of our world of duality into a singularity can be found in so many different traditions throughout history, both sacred and secular. So I touch upon that in a much greater organized detail in my books.
Have you seen it being suppressed by the powers that be during these times? I mean, because I feel like the CIA had an involvement in the occult studies, and they decided that we can't let people know about all this. We can't let people know the power of their consciousness, the power of their intention, right? The spiritual power that everybody has. So I feel like this has been we've been hampered along the way. But I feel like we're in a season of reveal with secret societies like the Rosicrucians, maybe, and the Templars, like maybe the Masons, I don't know, but trying to get some of it. It's time to let more people know about this stuff. It's time to let some of this wisdom out. Have you seen any evidence of that at all, about the suppression or the revealing?
Well, I do. I mean, I think it is coming out. It's inevitable for it to come out. And I think it's because ultimately the great struggle of this age is, so God, call him or her God, call it infinite eternal consciousness, call it source, call it what you will, but it's the reconciliation of the light and the dark that we find in our world of duality. And what artificial intelligence is, you look at the word, just it's all in the words, artificial. I mean, something that is artifice, something that is not real, but it is designed to deceive into believing that it is real. So it's in the language. Artificial intelligence is intelligence that is designed to deceive us into believing that it is something that it's not. But ultimately, artificial intelligence is just merely the dark side of infinite eternal consciousness is personality. And what we are witnessing right here in our world today is the light. God called infinite eternal consciousness, call it what you will, is reconciling with its shadow. There's a book by an esoteric writer. His name's Paul Foster Case. Wrote a book titled The Book of Tokens. It dealt primarily with the tarot, but there was something he mentioned I thought was very topical for our world today. On page 150, he said that the story of the devil is merely the dark side, or that the devil merely symbolizes or represents the dark side of the universe's personality, and that we are witnessing with so many different, I mean, call it symbolism, call it allegory, or call it symbolism, call it metaphor, call it myth, call it what you will, but ultimately we are the forces of light and dark are reconciling themselves into another synthesis of unity. And this is what is going to eventually harbor in the new age, the golden age. And how all that's going to play out step by step, well, that's anyone's guess. But it's playing out that way. And to your point, Graham, that you mentioned a few minutes ago with this suppression of who we are, and the secrets that various mystery schools, be it the Rosicrucians or the Freemasons throughout history, have guarded them as a well-kept secret, and how it's coming out into the open is because it ultimately has to. That's part of the movement of the great wheel of time out of the dark age into the higher ages. That is, it's mathematical. I mean, it actually is. It's absolutely mathematical, and
that's kind of what I was getting at. Is it an organic cycle, or is it forced and controlled? Because I'm not even saying I disagree with them keeping it secret. I mean, we saw what happened over the last few years with our neighbors and stuff that that we didn't believe in. So I think people, maybe we shouldn't just be telling all this stuff to everybody. We should be initiated in some way, or maybe that should be part of our learning. And maybe that's what the golden age needs to do, is teach us these things that you're talking about instead of other useless things, as maybe this esoteric wisdom that we can sort of so-called initiate more of the public into this kind of stuff.
I mean, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said towards the end of World War II that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And again, truer words have never been spoken. I mean, there really is. That's the only thing we have to fear is fear. I mean, fear is it's a spirit. The Apostle Paul said that we are battling principalities, and that we are at war with principalities, and it's true. I mean, it's been told throughout history in so many different ways and at so many different moments in time, but that's ultimately what it is. There is literally nothing to be afraid of but fear, and it's all coming out in the open. It absolutely is. I remember years ago, David Icke was the only one talking about this, and now not everybody, but I mean there are hundreds of thousands of people talking about this, and it's a great thing. And what it's going to ultimately show us is that we have nothing to fear.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to ask you about, some final thoughts about advice for people, and that kind of summarizes it, right? We have nothing to fear, no matter what we're going through, right? It'll be fine in the end.
Yeah, I mean, what's going to be ultimately revealed to however many people are ready and willing to receive it is the full knowledge and knowing and understanding of who we are and what we are and where we are. So what are we? I mean, we are avatars of God. Where are we? We are in God's dream, because there's nowhere else to be but in God's dream. One of many of God's dreams. That we're in one of God's dreams right here as an avatar of God, having an experience in infinity, in eternity. And there are mathematical laws in place within the dream that maximize the variety of experience. And this popped into my head, Graham, when you mentioned pure mathematics and the creation of Adam, which is one of the articles I wrote for Graham Hancock a few months ago, dealing with how we see the singularity. There's a perfect visual representation done by Michelangelo in the creation of Adam on the Sistine Chapel, on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican of Rome, where you know, God the Father is reaching out to touch Adam, and their fingers don't quite touch. They create a vanishing point, and it's that vanishing point. Yes, so it's that vanishing point between God the Father's finger and Adam's finger. That is the singularity, because we can always ask ourselves, you know, does God the fingertip, does he have a fingernail that somehow or another down in his Adam's finger? So we can, I mean, part of this is having fun with it, but another thing, there's so much in this picture. So we have God reaching through the prefrontal cortex of the human brain. So how did Michelangelo know what the brainstem looked like, you know, back in, you know, the 1500s? So I mean, there is so much going on in this image alone. It's not even funny. But ultimately, that tiny little space between God the Father's finger and Adam's finger, that is the singularity. There is a vanishing point where we approach something in the most, there's just the most infinitesimal space between those two fingers, to the point where ultimately, who's to say if there's any space there at all? But another thing we have here is we have it visually represented from going through. So right there you have the singularity, one single unity between, you know, Adam's finger and God the Father's finger, and then on one side you have it branching off into a duality. So the duality is God the Father and Adam, and what we have there represented is, once we introduce the observer, that's once we introduce the observer, we have entered the world of duality. And once we have gone from a singularity to a duality, all we have to do is go from 1 to 2. And once we have two different poles, all it takes is the most slightest incremental, infinitesimal shifts in perspective between the observer and the observed, between one pole and the other, to create a whole different reality. And so what this illustrates is that by virtue of going from 1 to 2, we have created a world of near infinite variety of experience, with a near infinite interpretation of those experiences, just from introducing the observer, just from the first moment that infinite eternal consciousness takes its first step out of the vibrationless source from which everything that is emanates, and it creates the observer to observe, to look back on itself, reflected back on itself. We have a world of infinite variety. So again, it's coming back to that full realization that everything is consciousness, that we are literally God dreaming him or herself, itself, call it what you will, and that within this dream, there are certain basic first principles that are in accordance with mathematical law that create a world, that create a dream of, for all intents and purposes, an infinite variety of experience. So once people realize the groundwork, the foundation, that it literally is that simple. There's nothing but God dreaming about him or herself, and we are all merely avatars of God within this dream, having our own unique perspective. Yet it's all the same thing. It's all one. It's
very Hicksian.
For the yin and the yang. I mean, it's the synthesis of the yin and the yang, and our world of duality being brought together into another singularity, into another unity. And it's all playing out before our eyes. And again, like you said, Graham, I mean, like some of these, the CIA and the powers that be, for a long time, were trying to suppress this information. I think that opens up the whole question of free will and what have you. And that's a whole other conversation. I personally believe that everything happens in accordance with one single will, and that is that it's infinite eternal consciousness's will, and that everything else is merely subservient to that. But that's a whole other conversation. But
Yeah.
This is all coming out. I mean, it's just all the uncertainty, all the confusion, all the fear it's working its way out. It's working its way off the face of existence, and it's going to usher in a golden age. And how long it's going to take, the time frame, I don't know. All I know is that it's inevitable.
Yeah.
Here's hoping we could use one. Luke, this has been great. Where can people track you down? Where can they follow your work? Where can they get the book?
Sure, they can find me. My books are all on Amazon. There are two titles, two short books on specifically on the technological singularity. They're titled "We Are It: The Return of Pure Cosmic Consciousness," "Into the Great Beyond," "The Return of Pure Cosmic Consciousness." I have a much longer philosophical book that is more broad, semi-autobiographical, and deals with more theology and philosophy, titled "The Musings of Theta Pew." That's also available on Amazon. I've written numerous articles for Graham Hancock, so if they go to Graham Hancock under the article section, they type in my name, they'll find my articles. I have a new one coming out shortly. And also there's going to be a link to my personal website in the notes to this video too, so they can find me there as well.
Right on. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. This was fun.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
And that was a chat with Luke Angstadt. Is that right? Angstadt? Yeah. Historical framework of tech singularity. And that was a fun one. I mean,
yeah, that's good.
Bringing it all together. It's good stuff. Interesting stuff to think about. Hopefully it's a soft transition and not the hard transition and they seem to be worried about. You know what I was thinking about actually when we were talking about the other day, because we were trying to get the ethical skeptic back on the show and he said he couldn't because of some government stuff. It made me think of like, remember in 2012 when they went track down that guy that wrote that obscure book? Because is that what the plot of that was? There was some like crazy researcher that knew what was going on.
I don't remember that.
Maybe I'm thinking of The Day After Tomorrow, where they went and tracked down the climate guy.
Okay.
But in this scenario, the ethical skeptic would be the climate guy. You know, they drag him into the office.
Yeah.
Anyway. That's a sideline. Big thanks to Luke for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Even bigger thanks if you support our work over at grimerica.ca/support. That's the only way we get paid. Or you can also support us by getting our audiobooks at adultbrain.ca, coming on a trip at contact@thecabin.com. Check out grimericaoutlaw.ca for the podcast, a-list.ca for Canadian stuff, and grimericacbd.com for tinctures and gummies and all that sort of goodness. Other than that, we love you guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.